Hello, YouTube world. I am the man, M.A.N, the middle-aged nerd. Today, I'm going to do a video for you guys about the Iran war. I've got thoughts on the current conflict in Iran. I've listened to the other pontificators. I've allowed some time to pass so I didn't make any knee-jerk judgments. I really wanted to put my thoughts together. And the first thought I have is going to take us back in time, and we're going to talk about the Romans for a little bit. The Romans survived, well, conquered, lasted, thrived, however you want to say, for about 2,200 years. We can count their legendary founding of 757 BC, and we can actually count the Roman Empire all the way until the fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD. For the first 500 years or so of Rome's existence, they were just, they were a little squirt on the Aventine and the Palatine Hills in Rome, Italy. And over the centuries, they progressed, they conquered, they developed, they became wealthier, they culturally enriched themselves, they engineered wonderful marvels like the aqueducts and the and the public baths and the sewer system and mail and farming technologies and all kinds of wonderful things that improved the quality of life of everyday people. They influenced cultures that were neighbors to them. A lot of people don't know this. The Romans conquered more territory and brought more people into the ranks of being citizens, or at the very least, being vassal states, or provincial citizens, being provinces of Rome, through just their cultural influence of people voluntarily coming to the Roman people and saying, hey, we want to be Rome. You guys got it going on. We're just a bunch of barbarians. We want to get on the winning team. They got more territory, more wealth, and more people just because of how great they were. Other people wanted to be like them than they actually did from military conquest. Well, around the time of the Third Punic Wars, and around the time that they conquered Greece, and around the time of Julius Caesar, we'll say. So we'll say, you know, from basically from the birth of Christ going back 200 years, like the first and second century BC. It was during this period of Roman history that they kind of went from kind of the young upstart new kid on the block, to being kind of the big boy, kind of being the big kid on the block. And they became, as the years went on, after the birth of Christ and after his life was over, into the first number of centuries AD, they more and more became the targets of barbarian raids and having issues with their neighbors, not unlike how the United States is having issues with our global neighbors today in Iran. So let's fast forward now to the beginning of the 7th century AD. At this point, the Western Empire fell in 476, but the General Belisarius, under command of the Emperor Justinian I, reconquered Rome and a good chunk of the Roman Empire in 536 AD. There was a plague in 542. It kind of put the whole European world kind of on hold for the next 50, 60 years. It was they called it the plague of Justinian. It was the first known instance of bubonic plague outbreak. It damaged the Persians, it damaged the Romans, it damaged the Western barbarian kingdoms. It was devastating. Some people think as much as a third of the human population, civilized population, died. So very, very devastating. By the early 7th century AD, they call them the Byzantines, we call them the Eastern. I'll still call them the Romans, because even though they're Eastern Romans, they're still technically the Roman Empire. They were not they were all but conquered. They had lost, Italy, they had lost North Africa, they had lost Egypt, they had lost Macedonia, their Balkan provinces. Basically, they had lost Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey. They had lost Mesopotamia. They had lost the areas around Judea and Syria, modern day Israel and Syria. They were in a tough way. The Persians were rampaging. The Eastern Romans had a number of civil wars through this guy Baghdad Phocas II, who was not a very good leader. Well, around 610-ish AD, this guy emerged as the leader of Constantinople named Heraclius. Um, and he ended up being not only the emperor of Constantinople, because that's all there was at that time. Their lands were completely devastated and conquered. You had barbarians, and you had from the west. You had Goths from the west. You had Huns and Bulgarians. I was trying to think of, you had Bulgarians to the north. You had Persians to the east, and you had these early kind of Arab tribes, these Bedouin tribes that were coming up from the south. And Constantinople, they were on the balls of their ass, man. But you had this emperor named Heraclius, and he got together the last bit of wealth. He went to the Hagia Sophia, and he went to all the bishops of the Orthodox Church, and he said, guys, I need all your I need your gold, I need your diamonds, your silver, your jewels and your jades and your sapphires, the fillings out of your teeth, for goodness sakes. I've got to hire an army, and we got to save ourselves. And the story of the Heraclean Wars is really, really interesting. But from 612 AD to 627 AD, this guy Heraclius, he pulls off the miracle of all miracle, which is he reconquers all of the territory they had lost. He reconquers places in North Africa, he reconquers Carthage, places that had not been Roman in multiple generations. He brings it all back into the fold, and the perpetual thorn in the side of the ass of the Romans that had been there since the days of the Battle of Thermopylae in ancient Greece, over 1,000 years of pain in the butt. The Persians were defeated. They were conquered. The Heraclius had finally beaten the Persians into submission. They did not the Romans didn't conquer all of their territory, but they took enough territory and they took enough money and slaves and tribute that the Persians in the middle 7th century were a broken people. They were utterly defeated by the Romans, and they would no longer go on to cause an issue for the Romans anymore. But at the same time, the Romans were exhausted. Their manpower was exhausted, their treasure was exhausted, their blood, they had been at war for so many hundreds of years at this point, really since the crisis of the 3rd century. They just needed a break. And they got a small one from the middle of the 7th century AD to the first siege of Constantinople in 674, which was the followers of Muhammad who broke off and started the Shia and the Sunni caliphates after Muhammad died. They kind of came out of Eastern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula like they were shot out of a cannon. They were horse warriors of the time, very quick, very adept. At that time, European Roman cavalry was very much focused on heavy horses with heavy armor, the soldiers with heavy armor, and they would have heavy swords and shields and armor, and bows and arrows. But because the Romans had such few numbers in those days, they were focused on putting all the technology into each individual soldier and horse that they could to make each man on the battlefield as valuable as possible. Well, these sand people who kind of came out of the Arabian Peninsula, they didn't have that problem. They had plenty of horses, plenty of camels, plenty of people. They didn't have access to steel and iron the way the Romans did. What they had a bunch of dudes who, from the time they were 5 years old, could ride a horse and could shoot a bow and arrow from horseback. Something that the Romans had mastered in the early 6th century under the command of Belisarius and his legendary Bucellari. But like I said, they were exhausted. Now these Arabs, these Muslims, this Muslim Islamic Caliphate, they come shot out of a cannon, and for no rhyme or reason, they pick a fight with the Persians and they conquer the Persians. And then they pick a fight with the Eastern Romans, and they start beating on the Eastern Romans in the late 6th century, late 7th century AD. At this time, the Emperor Heraclius is an old man. He's like in his 60s, and he might have been into his 70s. He had health problems, just from a lifetime of war and being on, just always being on campaign. And the Romans, they really kind of got beaten back. It's kind of funny. The Muslims, they didn't have the know-how or the ability to hold cities, but they would kind of do like they were kind of like proto-Mongols. They would kind of do what Genghis Khan would become famous for 500-600 years later. They would show up and they would raid a town or a city on the Eastern Roman province. They'd rape some women, take some others as slaves. They'd take some money, take some food, and kind of like the mafia, kind of extort these Eastern Roman towns. Well, they get together this big, massive army of 120,000 or so soldiers and sailors, a massive navy, thousands of ships, the whole might of the Islamic Caliphate. And again, without provocation, this is the point I want to make. Without provocation, they're Muslims and they have it as their decree that, hey, we got to go kill Christians or anyone who is not Muslim. So it started with the Persians. Well, they show up in 674 AD and they lay siege to Constantinople. And their military intelligence was wanting. We will say that. Because what happened was one of the greatest underdog stories in all of history. The Eastern Romans, for like the last 20 years, since they defeated Persia, they weren't resting on their laurels. They had been developing a new technology called Greek fire. Flamethrowers, baby. Early napalm that they could mount on ships, and they could row these ships out into the sea, and they could freaking spray fiery liquid death on their enemies. So this army, they show up, they lay siege to Constantinople. It is the first recorded use of Greek fire. The siege lasts from 674 to 678, and the Romans at the time have maybe 20,000, 15,000 soldiers, including conscripts, to actually protect the city of Constantinople. But they have the Aurelian walls. They're very well protected. They're very good at withstanding sieges. But their navy goes out, and their navy is outnumbered 15 ships to 1. But the Arab navy, they have bows and arrows, and the Romans, baby, they got flamethrowers. So they go out and just completely annihilate the entire Arab fleet. This leaves 100,000 or so Arabs stranded with no way to get resupply. And over the course of 4 harsh Roman winters, the entire army just kind of starves to death. And this is a devastating, humiliating defeat to the first Islamic Caliphate. I can't remember the names of off the top of my head of the leader, but he is forced to pay a humiliating tribute of tens of thousands of pounds of gold per year for 20 some odd years, however long it is. And it was basically like, you know, we are still Romans. We are still the big kids on the block. Don't you F with us again. And in 717 AD, a couple of generations after the utter catastrophe of the first siege of Constantinople, what do the Muslims do? The exact same thing they did before. They get another army of 100,000 people and another navy of 1,000 ships. They go and they lay siege to Constantinople a second time. Well, what happens? It's like a bad sequel, people. It's the same story, just told 40 years in the future. The Romans annihilate them once again with their Greek fire ships. Another 100,000 Arab soldiers, though this year it only takes 1 year for the Romans to completely wipe. At this point, their army had, at this point, the Romans were using their navy, their fire ships, to reestablish themselves in the region to protect Roman shipping from piracy and from aggressors. They were able to use the fire ships to get tax revenues flowing back in. So at this point, at 717 AD, the Romans had rebuilt their they had rebuilt their strength quite a bit. So after one winter of Arabs, I think the Romans probably just got tired of looking at these gaunt Holocaust surviving looking dudes out on their front lawn, and they sent the army out and just utterly annihilated the Arabs. Once again, the Second Islamic Caliphate to conquer the Eastern Romans, all of Christendom, it fails. And now the Muslims, they finally learn their lesson. They still have Iran, modern day Persia, but they sail west to look for new lands to conquer. Well, they can't, they have to go past the reaches of the Roman Empire, and they settle in Iberia, which at the time was Gothic and Visigothic barbarian kingdoms. Well, they set up shop, and for 700 years, they're a menace in modern day Spain and Portugal. But okay, so that's enough of the history lesson. The point I'm trying to illustrate by that is they don't think about warfare in a conventional sense. It does not matter to the Muslim that they are woefully inadequate for a war they're going to fight. They will sacrifice 100,000 of their own soldiers to make a point. And if their enemy gets tired, like, they consider it a victory if the arm of the Christian is so heavy with fatigue because they have been hacking Muslims to death, and if the Christian conscience just says enough, we've beaten them enough. We are tired. We are tired of kicking the crap out of our enemy. We want it to stop. The Muslims will say, hey, the Christians, they didn't kill all of us. We win. So let's take that ideology and fast forward to 2026. Okay? We have had issues. Sidebar, go watch the movie Lawrence of Arabia. It depicts the inner Islamic feuding between the Sunnis and the Shias very, very well. It's a movie about World War I. It's a really fantastic film. It's a beautiful film, too, if you guys have never seen it. But fast forward to, there was a bit of a hubbub on September 11th, 2001. George Bush made the decision to go get in some scrum in Afghanistan and Iraq. He decided that, you know what, these Muslim terrorists, and it's not all Muslims. Let me make that very clear. It's certain types of Muslims. Like, there are Muslims in Indonesia. They don't cause trouble the way these Middle Eastern Muslims cause trouble. There's Muslims in the Philippines and Thailand and Burma. There are Nation of Islam Muslims who are kind of like a black racist, black supremacy by their own admission. They're Nation of Islam, like Malcolm X dudes. They don't cause trouble. Like Muhammad Ali was a Nation of Islam Muslim. Those Muslims, they don't cause trouble the way these Middle Eastern, specifically these Iranian Muslims, certain ones of them tend to cause trouble. So, George Bush spends, he kicks off this war on terror where we've done nothing but just kick the hell out of their way of life. We have shown the Muslim world a better way of life. And to the credit of George W. Bush, I still think the Iraq and the Afghanistan war were good things. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, a modern day Iraq, a lot of these countries have really started modernizing. In Saudi Arabia, women are allowed to drive cars now. They just had that comedy festival in Dubai. They are, all these Arab nations minus Iran and I think Syria, they signed these Abraham Accords that were brokered by a Jew. It was Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, who got all of these Muslim Arab nations together to say, hey, listen, let's stop let's stop adhering to some of the more radical elements of the Quran. Maybe it's not a good idea to strap explosives to ourselves and kill Jewish, school children. Maybe flying airplanes into buildings is not the best way for our people to endure. But you've got these Iranians, and it's a cultural thing, right? Like the Persians for 1,000 years were a pain in the neck of the Romans. And then when the Ottoman Empire kicked off in, what do we want to say, 1299 is when the Ottomans really kind of constituted themselves. And they eventually conquered Constantinople in 1453. They just made war on their neighbors for 600 plus years. And then after World War I and World War II, the Iranians, for a while they were cool when they had the Shah, when they were being Western. But in 1979, they go back to this business of wanting to be these hardcore, end of the world death cult Muslims. And like I said, George W. Bush said Islam is a religion of peace. I do not agree with him, but I understand why he said it. He was trying to win a PR war against Muslims of the time. But now Trump, he gets, the Iranians will not stop trying to make a nuclear weapon. It doesn't help much that Obama flew them pallets of cash, just billions and billions of dollars, and just basically like paying the mafia for protection. But it's like Chamberlain negotiating with Hitler. In the words of Winston Churchill, you cannot negotiate with a tiger when your head is in its mouth. And that's kind of how Obama thought with Iran. Trump, he did some stuff in his first term. He dropped that Moab in Syria. He took out some of the high-ranking generals of the Iranian army. And then Biden was completely useless because he has Alzheimer's and he was being led around by his puppets. And then so now Trump gets word that the Iranians will not stop trying to build a nuclear weapon. So what does he do? Last summer, he goes and he bombs a bunch of their underground nuclear reactor facilities. And he thinks, okay, that is done and done. And what are these crazy Iranians doing? They're digging out the rubble. They're getting their freaking plutonium like Doc Brown, and they're trying to build another. They just like, they're like beavers. You go and destroy their dams, and what do beavers do? They just start building another dam, and it doesn't matter how many times you go and you have to kill the beavers because Beavers build dams. It's what they do. These Iranian Muslim crazy dudes, they want to blow up the world. That's what they do. Now, what has Trump done this time? He has completely destroyed their entire navy. It's starting to get dark. I'm going to try to turn on this light here. There we go. Made it a little bit easier for YouTube world to see me. He goes and just bombs the ever living crap out of them. Destroys their air force. Destroys their navy. Destroys 90% of their drone capacity. We've been picking off these little mosquito boats. Hard to get all of them without actually putting your army on the ground. I think we should have already landed the Marines and the Army. I think we should have already sent the first armored, division. I think we should have put tanks on the ground. I think we should have put artillery on the ground. I think we should have already conquered these coastal territories. But I don't have all the information the Trump administration has. So where are we today? Trump, he blew up Iran. There are boats that are coming in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, but the oil is not flowing like it has been. Trump has done a tremendous amount of damage. I'll say catastrophic amount of damage to the Iranian economy. Now it looks like he's negotiating. Looks like we might be giving up some concessions more than what Trump said. It looks like some sleeper cell agent took a shot at Ivanka Trump, the daughter of the president. I don't know how close it was to being successful, but that's definitely probably put a bee in the bonnet of the president. But where the president is now is Iran has been utterly devastated. The next move that their nuclear, the Iranians, their capabilities to make a nuclear weapon have been degraded by most likely decades. What is the next step Trump is going to have to take? Well, it's one of three things. He is going to have to either A, land the army, and there's going to have to be a ground war where we're going to have to use tanks and artillery and infantry to go town by town and conquer these towns. And we're going to have to occupy them the way we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Trump doesn't want to do that. Trump does not want this to be a multi-year long war the way Iraq was. It would not break my heart if we did that. Unfortunately, politically, we would probably lose the midterms and we would probably lose the White House in 2028. And the Democrats would reverse everything and end up, the Democrats would just make things worse. But if I thought that the Republicans would win the midterms, and if I thought that we would get another Republican in the White House, it would not break my heart to do like what we did in Cuba. Take a little bit of their territory so that we could ensure that they weren't going to take any more pot shots at the boats coming in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, and build a wall and just take some of their territory and tell them, so we can keep an eye on them. The other step, option B, is that Trump goes and he bombs their power plants and he bombs all their roads. What this will effectively do is incapacitate the Iranians. They will have no electricity and they will have no way to transport food and water. And the third option is that Trump just does both of those things. He sends in the army and he reduces their civilization to stone ages. The reason why Trump has not, in my view, the reason why Trump has not blown up, because we can do it. It's very easy. We have a space force. We can nuke them from space. We can carpet bomb their cities. It's not a matter of us having the ability to kill millions and millions of people. It's the fact that Trump doesn't want to. If Trump carpet bombs Tehran, and if he basically turns the lights off and he cuts off. If the Iranians no longer have air conditioning and water and food, you will have a 90 million people humanitarian crisis, the likes that this world has never seen. You will have an immediate and, you know, civilization ending humanitarian crisis. You will have 90 million people plunged into anarchy. The government will cease to function. Without gasoline for their trucks, or bullets for their guns, or food for their soldiers, it will be instant civil war. It will be pandemonium, and millions upon millions of innocent civilians will die. It would be it will be the Holodomor times 10. It would be very, very catastrophic on a humanitarian level. Trump doesn't want to do that, and I tip my cap to him. Trump wants to ensure that these people want to stop making a nuclear bomb, which short of annihilating all of those people, Trump, unfortunately, we don't have the power to do that. I think he is realizing that. I think he's going to make a deal with the Iranians. I think over time, cooler heads possibly will prevail in the Iranian regime, because now what has to happen is Trump has inflicted hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage, not only on their economy, like with lost revenue to their treasury in Tehran, but he destroyed their Navy and their Air Force, and most of their all of their drone factories, all of their drone capabilities. When the Iranians, when this blockade is over and they start making money again, they're going to have to make a decision. Do we feed our people, or do we start building nukes again? This might be the impetus for the CIA to get in there and start funneling some AK-47s and some Molotov cocktails to some insurgent groups within the country. But that's where the war stands at this point. I think we have done sufficient damage to them that it is okay to negotiate whatever kind of truce we can. I think we leave them alone, let them go back to earning money at this point. I think we have done. I see this war achieving short-term and medium-term goals. The long-term goals of trying to get these people to stop being nuts, unfortunately, I think that is going to have to be a problem that is solved by a future president. So there we are.